A Buddhist, a Christian, and an atheist go into a bar. So the Buddhist in this story is not really a strict Buddhist. It's someone from the West who takes mystical experiences very seriously. These experiences, perhaps from psychedelics or prolonged meditation, where the ego seems to be transcended and some fundamental interconnectedness underlying all things seems to be experienced. So this individual takes these experiences very seriously and thinks that Eastern religions like Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta make more sense of them than Western monotheism. Okay, so that's the Buddhist. The Christian in this story is more influenced by intellectual considerations. They take very seriously these philosophical arguments rooted in the need to explain why the universe exists, why there's something rather than nothing. This Christian takes very seriously the fine-tuning of physics for life, this seeming discovery of recent physics that for life to be possible, certain numbers in physics had to fall in a very narrow range. And so that on the face of it, it seems wildly improbable that a universe like ours would get the right numbers for life just by chance. So that's the Christian. The atheists in our story, they're really driven by the suffering of the world. They just can't make sense of the idea that a loving God who could do anything would choose to create a universe with so much suffering in, would choose to bring us into existence through the horrific process of evolution by natural selection. And so they take this to be very good reason to think God doesn't really exist. The punchline of the story is I am all three people rolled into one. There are these three fundamental motivations that normally divide people into kind of warring factions. And I can't let go of any of them. I want it all. And really, I think just my work in recent time, my philosophy in recent time is trying to come up with a worldview that reconciles all of these. So for people who've read my book, Why the Purpose of the Universe, just out in paperback, if you're interested, you might be familiar with how I try to reconcile the motivation of the Christian in our story with the motivation of the atheist in our story, which is, I think that the evidence points to a God of limited powers. A God who's made the best universe they can, right? I think this hypothesis can accommodate both the fine-tuning of physics for life in terms of God's purposes and the suffering in terms of God's limitations. So that's how I reconcile a sort of drive for theism and the drive for atheism. What about trying to reconcile these ego dissolution experiences with Christian monotheism? Well, this is really what I'm working on at the moment with my new book, which is called tentatively Heresy. And I'm still working this out. I'd be interested to know what people think. But where I'm up to at the moment is this, right? If I was just motivated by these ego dissolution mystical experiences, probably I'd be a proponent of Advaita Vedanta. This kind of radical mysticism in which there is only pure, undifferentiated consciousness, right? There isn't you and me and this and that. Atman is Brahman, as they put it. I am pure consciousness. You're pure consciousness. My cat Kiara that's sleeping over there is pure consciousness. There is just one thing, or not even one thing. Somehow countable nouns don't make sense. Anyway, I can't make sense of that kind of really radical mysticism. Maybe I need to have an ego dissolution experience, see if it makes more sense. But at the moment, I just can't make sense of that. So where I'm up to at the moment is trying to whether we can make sense of a sort of view where God and the universe overlap, right? So there's a bit of God that's not the universe. There's a bit of the universe that's not God. But then there's the overlap bit, and pure consciousness is the sort of bit where they overlap. So what is experienced in these ego dissolution experiences is this, think of a Venn diagram, is this realm of reality where God and the universe overlap. Okay, sounds kind of wacky, sounds weird. I don't know whether it makes sense, but I want it all. I want it all. And this is where I'm thinking to try and reconcile these kind of mystical experiences that are taken very seriously in Advaita Vedanta with Western Christian monotheism. Anyway, more to come on this. So yeah, it's just been kind of a realization thinking, actually, that is what's fundamentally driving me. I want all of these three things to make sense. I suppose if you were to psychoanalyze me, there's two possible explanations of this. A, I'm just really driven by the truth rather than wanting to be on a team, rather than wanting to have an identity in one of these warring factions, and I'm just following the evidence and arguments where they're leading. The other possibility is maybe I just like annoying people. I'll leave you to decide which of those is more plausible. Okay, so I do these monthly solo videos. Start with a kind of what thought for the month, what I've been thinking this month, which is kind of what I've just told you. And then get to subscriber questions. So if you subscribe to my Substack, a lot of cool questions there. I'm gathering 10 questions each month, prioritizing paid subscribers, but anyone in principle. And I'll get to those in a second. Quick update of what's going on. My book, Why the Purpose of the Universe, just out in paperback. I'm very proud, is Book of the Month in Blackwell's in Oxford, this wonderful historic bookshop. There might be some events going on there. Well, actually, I'm definitely going to be talking to former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, about that in September. But there might be some events going on before that too. In May, next month now, isn't it? It's April the 1st today. Might be a little bit later when you watch this video. I'm going to be doing 2 events in person with William Lane Craig. We're going to do a more debatey type event in the Royal Institution in London, May the 1st. Still a few tickets left for that. Get one quickly. Also with Jessica Frazier and Joe Foley on the panel. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going on Joseph Foley's channel in the near future as well. And then a couple of days later, I'm very honoured that Craig is going to come all the way to Durham, where I live in the far north, and I'm going to take him on a little sightseeing tour of the cathedral and so on. And then in Durham Castle, we're going to have a more civilized discussion. We've got 2 very different forms of Christianity. We're living in a very polarized world, and I think we're going to explore we're going to debate a little bit, obviously. We like a fight. But we're going to, explore how we can live together with disagreement, how people can, we've got to live in the same world. People think fundamentally different things, and they matter to them very much. How can we live together? I'd say sign up to that. I was thinking, oh, God, I need to get around to advertising this. I advertised it. It's sold out within an hour. I was quite blown away. But so unfortunately, I asked the university, can we have a bigger room? But we want to do it in the castle, and this is the only place we've got in the bishop's dining room. Very fancy. So anyway, if you want to come and see me and Craig, there are still tickets left for the London thing. I'm sure there's more information. Can't think of any. I'm hopefully about to submit this book in the not too distant future. Looking forward to an Easter break, actually. Okay, let's get to these subscriber questions. Thank you so much. They were excellent questions. It was difficult to choose between them. Okay, let's go. Julius Navilus. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. YLLUS. Julius? Is pressing, I won't read the whole question out, but pressing the anthropic objection to fine-tuning arguments for God. So we can have anthropic combined with the multiverse that I discuss a lot. Check out my recent discussion on Phil Halper's channel, Skydive Phil's channel. Very, very interesting discussion there. But what Julius is interested in, so I'm probably mispronouncing that, is what I call anthropic to the max. So his point is, well, look, if we're setting this up as a Bayesian argument, don't we just put in the background information that I exist? Or if I'm thinking of myself doing the calculation that I exist. And so it's inevitable. It's 100% probable. It's expected that the numbers in physics are going to be right for life because I exist. That's a starting point assumption. I mean, this is a serious objection that needs to be taken into account. Elliot Sober tries to defend it. I mean, I think there's two ways at least we can respond to this. One, I won't repeat it now, but I've pressed John Leslie's firing squad analogy. It's just a way of pushing there must be something wrong with this objection. You know, a sort of reductio ad absurdum. There must be something wrong with this because we'd get stuck with the firing squad example. We'd have to say crazy things in that case. But that doesn't tell us what is wrong with this objection. Ultimately, what I think, actually, I'm very attracted to the view of Nevin Kleimenhager, great philosopher, who I'm actually booked in. This was supposed to happen this week. It's got delayed, but it's going to happen. To chat to on the Analytic Christian channel. Very good Christian philosophy channel. Anyway, independent of all this stuff, he defends a sort of non-standard interpretation of Bayesian reasoning, which is rediscovering the great economist Keynes' view of how we think about Bayesian reasoning. And really what he thinks is fundamental is not this story about updating on new evidence and then we get stuck on what do we put in the old evidence, but is about relations of rational support between propositions. And this just gets rid of the whole problem, really, because then it's just, you know, propositions are sort of timeless, abstract objects. We're just examining these relations of support. It doesn't matter, like, which proposition you happen to discover first or not, or whether you exist. You know, it's a more sort of, I guess it's a more Platonic picture of things in a way. You know, we're mapping out these epistemic connections between propositions. Check out Nevin's wonderful paper on this, where he just says it just avoids a lot of puzzles with Bayesian reasoning if we think about it in this quite simple way. Felix Sanchez says, got a few interrelated questions about chapter 3 of the Why book. I'm just going to focus on the first one because we've got lots of questions to get through. Hope that's okay, Felix. So therein you defend panagentialism, where particles are disposed from their own nature to respond rationally to their experience. So rational particles. So what I want to know, Felix says, is why should we think the particles are disposed to act rationally? It seems that the work you get on your view by adding this is not obviously better than those who add some fact about their dispositions without the rationality bit. Yeah, look, I mean, I totally agree with you if we're just, you know, looking at how particles behave, right? We're not going to think they're behaving rationally. What is driving me here is the mystery of psychophysical harmony. Why consciousness and behavior is generally aligned in a rationally appropriate way. It's so difficult, this problem, because I think it's the most important problem in philosophy, but it's hard to get people to see what the issue is. And maybe there isn't an issue, but a lot of people who've thought about it a lot, like myself, think there is a serious issue here. So even if you think it's bullshit, you've at least got to think, well, why is Goff confused into thinking there's an issue? And roughly the thought is, if you think consciousness and behavior are at least conceptually separable, then why should they be aligned in a rationally appropriate way? For example, pain tends to go with avoidance behavior, pleasure with attraction behavior. This is rationally appropriate. It's appropriate to avoid things that hurt and go for things that give you pleasure. But why should that be? If these things are conceptually separate, why should they come together in a way that respects norms of rationality? And it's the panagentialism stuff that's supposed to address that. So we have to get clear on that first. It's not just, oh, look at particles. They seem to be behaving as little rational agents. Of course not. It's about that. And so if you want more on that, my discussion with Alex O'Connor, which is the first interview on this fairly new YouTube channel, is hammers into that for like 3 hours or something. Okay. Pablo Jehuti asks, why don't panpsychist philosophers usually consider the empirical evidence that supports their position? There are many panpsychist scientists with interesting work that you might want to check out, such as Rupert Sheldrake, Michael Levin, and Gregory Matloff. Yes, I mean, I'm familiar with these people. So I would give two answers to this. Firstly, I mean, different people focus on different things. We have more theoretical physicists. We have more experimental physicists. I guess I'm a philosopher who's more focused on conceptual issues. I think there's important work for purely conceptual issues, especially in these areas of science where the rules of the game are a bit unclear. And that's just really where my preference and my expertise is focused. I do some work, though, on connecting to the empirical stuff. In the Why book, I go into building on work of Matthias Michel, really. Why maybe the reason we have trouble making progress in the philosophy of consciousness is certain conceptual philosophical issues that our assumptions are affecting how we're interpreting the evidence. I'm thinking about this more and more. There seem to be more and more papers, fascinating papers coming out on why are we not making progress on consciousness? What can and can't be dealt with experimentally? Not the big hard problem questions. Check out my my discussion with Anil Seth on this. The audio, the microphones fortunately didn't work. The audio it was pretty crap, but a fascinating conversation if you can overlook that. So that's what I say about that. But secondly, look, I don't think the difference between panpsychism, dualism, physicalism is an empirical question. Consciousness is not publicly observable. We know about consciousness through our direct awareness of it. So this, I mean, the way I think about the problem of consciousness, really, it's how to bring together two radically different ways of knowing about reality. We know about consciousness from the inside by being conscious. And we know about the physical world from the outside by doing science, doing experiments, observations. How do you unify these two things? And there isn't an experiment that can settle all the answers. I think fundamentally, the science is very important, but it just leaves us with correlations. This kind of brain activity goes along with the kind of experience. We start with the human case and we kind of extrapolate, and that leaves open, the physicalist has a way of explaining these correlations. The dualist has a way of explaining the correlations. The panpsychist does. We just need to do more conceptual philosophy to do it. So that's what I'd say to that. Okay, Gus Schultz says, in the Why book, another question about the Why book. Thank you very much. Doing well, I guess, because it's just come out in paperback. A few more people latching onto it. So anyway, in the Why book, you present a parity between good God and evil God and rule them both out. Then you limit good God's power to rule him back in. But why don't you consider limited evil God? That seems to be a more plausible explanation for the problem of systematic evil you raised against good God. It's an excellent question, and you're right, it's not one I consider in the Why book. And it's not one that occurred to me until, well, Jack Symes, I think, is someone who's pressed this on me. And he had a dissertation student. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, your name. I'm blanking on your name now. Email me and I'll say your name in next month's solo video. Was doing dissertation focusing on exactly that. And it, pushed me to think about this. So why not limited bad God? I think fundamentally this is connected to my moral objectivity. I think if you're an objectivist about value, which I think you sort of have to do to get the fine-tuning argument going, or I argue in why maybe you can do it the other way around. You can get moral objectivity as a hypothesis that's supported by the fine-tuning. Check out the book if you want more details on that. But let's just take for granted for the moment that we think there are objective facts about good and bad and right and wrong and facts about reasons. Then I think a good God is a simpler hypothesis. Being good is sort of simpler than being evil. Why is that? Because I think actually, if we're going for good God, then we can say that God doesn't actually have any desires. In the sense of sort of yearnings, conscious yearnings. God's not sitting there thinking, oh, I really want that. God doesn't have desires. God's just responding to what God has reason to do. God's just responding to facts about objective value, right? Whereas if it's bad God, so as for a moral objectivist, if you're perfectly good, you're just doing what you have reason to do. Why do people do bad things then? Well, it's for two reasons. Either they're getting the facts of value wrong, they're misunderstanding, they're making a moral error, a value error, or they're overpowered by strong desires, yearnings. Like, I really want to kill this person who's really annoying me, who doesn't have the right philosophical views. That inclination quite a lot, I don't really. And that overpowers the judgment about what the right thing to do is. So if we're going to have a bad God, it's more of a complex psychology. Because what are God's yearnings, or what errors is God making to get exactly the good and evil we find? Whereas just perfectly good God is much simpler. God is just, doesn't have any desires, is just doing the best, trying to do the best. But then there's the suffering. Well, we give these very precise limitations. Okay. It's getting dark in here. I hope it's not getting dark on the camera. Okay. Discourse asks, how do phenomenal transparency and revelation deal with challenges from the existence of perceptual and cognitive illusions? For example, color illusions, change blindness, distance illusions. Great question. So this is something I've thought about a lot, because I don't want to say we're infallible. I think we can make mistakes about our experience. I think I'm inclined to agree with Ned Block's overflow thesis that there are aspects of our experience that we don't have cognitive access to, that our experience overflows what we have cognitive access to. So what I say in my more refined definition of revelation, I'm going to explain what revelation is. Well, I'll give you the more refined definition and then you'll get it. I say, insofar as we know what it's like to have an experience, we know the essence of that experience. We know the essential nature of that experience. We know what it is to have that experience. So that allows that we might not know everything there is to know about what it's like to have. Even though we're having the experience, we don't know everything there is to know about what it's like, because we don't know all the experiential details. But insofar as we do, we grasp the essence of the experience. Is this trivial? Ask yourself, is this trivial, this statement? If you know how a certain pain feels, you know what it is to feel that way. If you know how it feels, you know what it is to feel that way. I think it's trivial. I think it's self-evident, but lots of physicalists deny it. And I think basically the vast majority of philosophical physicalist philosophers deny that. And well, maybe I'll write a Substack on this at some point. And I think really you have to, if you're a physicalist, or unless you're an illusionist, basically. Okay, so physicalism is self-evidently false. Right, counter-apologist. I won't read the whole, there's a long question here, but the basic idea is there a problem believing in a limited God, but at the same time believing in an afterlife? Okay, and basically the thought is, if you believe in an afterlife, why didn't God create the wonderful afterlife from the start? So when we get back to the problem of evil. Good question. I mean, certainly, firstly, I would definitely say with a God of limited powers, a wonderful afterlife is less probable, right? Because I think a good God would want to preserve our consciousnesses after death, but we don't know whether God can do that. So it's definitely less probable. And I have faith in a certain heretical form of Christianity, but I'm very uncertain it's true, right? I don't think faith and certainty go together. I think it's plausible enough to live in hopeful commitment of it, but I'm very uncertain of it. But basically, my Christian faith is rooted in how the Eastern Orthodox Church thinks about things. And I just think how they think about Christian salvation fits quite well with a God of limited powers, even though they don't believe in a God of limited powers. That's why I'm not in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but I think it fits quite well. So basically, that my thought is God can only create from simplicity, from a big bang, from a singularity. God can't just create complex intelligent life. God can only create a universe with the right physics that will eventually evolve intelligent life. And God has to get to that stage, has to get intelligent life, and then enter into a more metaphysically intimate unity with that intelligent life in order to create a wonderful afterlife. Okay? So, the core of Eastern Orthodox Christianity is God shared in our form of existence so that we can share in God's form of existence. As Athanasius said, God became man so that we might become gods with a small g. Sounds heretical to Western ears, but, Athanasius was, one of the founding thinkers in Christian orthodoxy. Anyway, okay, so it's all about God and humanity, ultimately God and the universe becoming one. But you need humanity first to get there. Anyway, if you want more details, check out my paper, Christianity and a God of Limited Powers. It's on my website, unpublished. I will update when I get a chance, but it's there if you want more details. Now, and just to admit again, this is all very uncertain because if you just a deistic God, if you just want a deistic limited God to explain fine-tuning, it's very simple. I've got a lot more confidence in that. But when you want to add to God's powers to make sense of all this Christian shenanigans, but you've got to do it in a way where you don't make God too powerful that you get the problem of evil back. It's a tricky balancing act. And it can get a bit complicated and it lowers the prior probability and makes it less certain. So this is why I'm so uncertain about it. But I think it's just about plausible to be a credible possibility, which I think is all you need to have faith in something. I'm very open to the possibility that after death, there is nothing. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe there's being reabsorbed back into pure consciousness. But maybe there is maybe a God of limited powers worked out a way once humanity's there, and they can sort of intermingle with it a bit of getting some kind of personal afterlife. Mackenzie D. Taylor asks a related question. When are you joining the Orthodox Church? I'm not. Well, not for the moment. I don't know. I don't agree with everything they think. And, I have pretty liberal views on LGBT issues. And I don't like that they don't have women priests. So I found my spiritual home combining the mysticism of the Eastern Church and the liberal flexibility of the Anglican Church. Having said that, there is an Eastern Orthodox Church in Durham, my city, which I would like to check out at some point. I don't know. Maybe I'll feel the call of the Spirit. The call of the Spirit, the presence of the Spirit, filled with the Spirit. See how it goes. I'm open to anything, man. The journey never ends. Okay, George Williams, but it's not on the cards at the moment. Okay, George Williams, is it a problem for fine-tuning that most of our universe seems very hostile to life? We're just a tiny speck. Two things I would say to this, George. So one, look, when you're doing Bayesian reasoning, you you consider you at least can, and it's pretty standard to consider different bits of evidence and isolate that bit of evidence by putting everything else in the background knowledge. So when you're considering the evidence that the numbers in physics are in the narrow range that's right for life, you put everything else in the background. And you just say what hypothesis best explains, speaking quite loosely, or renders probable, renders expected, that data point. And I would say that data point is much more probable on theism than atheism. Now, it's compatible with that. Okay, then now let's turn to the evidence that most of the universe is empty. My colleague, wonderful historian of philosophy, Emily Thomas, is it in The Conversation, an article arguing that the immensity of the universe, the emptiness of the universe, is evidence for atheism? Fine, we can take that, right? That's absolutely fine. So I think it's consistent for a theist to say, yes, you're right, George. The emptiness is evidence against God, but the fine tuning is evidence for God, and on balance, that the probabilities in the fine tuning are so huge that evidence wins. So I think that's what a traditional theist can say. But you're in an even better position if you're me, because I believe in a God of limited powers. So I think, my hypothesis explains both. My theism explains both. The reason we got this mostly empty universe, we don't know how much life there is throughout it, but a lot of it's certainly lifeless, could just be because that's the only way God can do it. And I think we can quite precisely define the limitations that would yield, if we have a good God with those limitations, that would yield the kind of universe we find. So it's a simple hypothesis that explains the data. Okay, James says, you probably mentioned this somewhere, but what do you think about the idea that even if there is a multiverse, this multiverse would have to be fine-tuned, and hence, as a response to the fine-tuning argument, things are only pushed back? Well, also, what do you think about a more general argument? I try to argue that the fact that reality has order to the need for, from the order of the universe to need for rationality, orderly foundation. Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat open-minded on this. I'm agnostic on this, I guess. Matthew Edelstein makes this response to because he believes in a multiverse and fine-tuning, and he gives this kind of response to why the multiverse doesn't deal with God. And on the latter point, Brian Cutter, my friend, has pressed this more general argument. I just think it's kind of harder to make the case. Like, what are we putting in? How do we narrow down the options? What are we putting? We can't just say, given every possible universe, what's more likely? I don't know how to assess that question. We've got to think about, like, what can we put in the background evidence to sort of narrow down the question in a non sort of contrived way, so we're not kind of cooking the books. And you can do that quite easily in the fine tuning. I think it's for just, taking the values, putting everything in the background evidence except the values of the constants. So that kind of form or structure of physics, I think that's a really non-contrived way of posing the question, and we get a clear answer. So it's just, I don't know, it's harder to ask the question, and maybe I don't want to ask the question because it might cause problems for my God of limited powers. But anyway, I do think it's a bit of a psychoanalyzing myself there. But I do honestly think it's more hard to make the case. Finally, Jake Cunningham asks about Colin McGinn's recent objection to panpsychism, which I won't read the whole thing out. You can look on Colin McGinn's blog post. Basically, what he's offering is a form of the palette problem, what's called the palette problem, which is just the thought was, look, for us Bertrand Russell-inspired panpsychists, where there's, at the base of reality, there's just a small number of forms of consciousness. How do we get out of that all the rich diversity of different sense modalities? Just seems so much qualitative richness and variety to consciousness. How do we get all that out of just this tiny number of forms of consciousness? So it's like, the reason for the name is imagining a an artist working with just a small number of like 3 paints. How many fundamental properties are there in physics? So for the Russell-inspired panpsychist, that's how many basic forms of consciousness there are. You can look at, I think in my yeah. So anyway, sorry, I didn't finish the analogy, did I? With those, how does the painter, all this wonderful multicolored painting from these small number of basic paints, small palette. That was horribly explained, wasn't it? I'm getting tired. Nearly Easter, end of the week. I'm having a week off. I think I talk a little bit about this in my paper. How exactly does panpsychism explain consciousness? Although now I think about it, maybe that was cut out because it was too long. But like, it's a very deep problem. Who was it now? My mind's blanking. Who thought maybe it's like kind of like all the colors come out of white light. Do you know what I mean? Like all the colors are sort of latent in a sort of richer form of consciousness that's latent with all this multiplicity. And we are very limited here insofar as Thomas Nagel said, we don't even know what it's like to be a bat. Never mind an electron. There's so much of different kinds of consciousness we can't access. So we're limited in making progress, which, you know, isn't a reason to give up. I know Sam Coleman, who I've interviewed, is optimistic that we can make progress on this. Maybe we'll have to sort of find technological ways of experiencing other kinds of consciousness, the consciousness of a bat, to sort of make more progress. But it's very challenging. But McGinn says, well, look, where's the explanatory advantage? And I think fundamentally he's doing what many people do. He's just thinking that the motivation of panpsychism is to explain our consciousness. Right? When I did a panel discussion, you can look on my website with Ned Block, you know, he was pressing this familiar objection. He was on Sean Carroll's podcast recently pressing this. You know, okay, physicalists have problems, explanatory gap, but turn to panpsychism, you have problems too. You don't get anywhere. And this is one way of pressing that. But that is not the only explanatory advantage of panpsychism. The advantage of panpsychism, the central advantage, I think, and this is the Bertrand Russell inspiration, is you can explain all of physical reality just in terms of consciousness. Right, I've got into that. I won't go into that now. But so it's turning the problem of consciousness upside down. Instead of starting with physical stuff, trying to get consciousness out, you start with very simple forms of consciousness and get physical reality out. So I think that way of posing the hard problem is sort of not fair, because it's sort of setting things up in the way the physicalist does. When we don't accept that starting point. We're turning the whole thing upside down, man. Okay, so I think that's an important point in the case for panpsychism. And like, you know, fundamentally, I just think there's very good reasons to think physicalism is just incoherent. Once you accept that, you just think, what's the simplest alternative? Either dualism or something mysterious, we don't know what it is. That's actually Colin McGinn's view, Mysterianism, or panpsychism, where the one thing we know to be real is the only thing that is real. And that's all we need to account for. All we need is consciousness. That's all we need to account for everything we know to be real, for all our data points. I like the line from, I'm getting a bit tired now, Arthur Eddington. It's a bit silly to sort of suppose there's no consciousness down there and then wonder where the consciousness comes from, when consciousness is the only thing we know to be real, and we can get everything we need just with consciousness. Maybe we can't fill in all of the details. Maybe we have to add some extra primitives to make sense of combination. I mean, let's not give up yet. Let's keep going. But still, I think it's the most simple, elegant, unified, coherent option. Okay, well, I'll leave it there, I think. Thank you for your support. Please subscribe to my channel, to my Substack. Support me financially if you can. I want to do more in-person interviews, maybe in the castle in Durham. I'm drawing inspiration from that. That'd be quite cool, wouldn't it? And maybe do some events. Let's see where we can take this. But I'm enjoying being part of the online philosophy community. Even though everyone hates me, yeah, I've worked out why everyone hates me. Because, you normally, there's these three teams, aren't there? There's the spiritual but not religious, who like mystical experiences. There's the Christian philosophers who like the traditional arguments. And there's the atheists who like the problem of evil. And you're supposed to choose. And I'm trying to do all three. So I like the spiritual but not religious people see my stuff and they're like, oh yeah, cool man, consciousness everywhere. And then, hold on, what's all this fine-tuning stuff? Sounds too much like God. And then the Christian philosophers are like, oh yeah, man, fine-tuning. Why does the universe exist? And they say, oh, no, evil. Why are you talking about evil? That's not a problem. Just put that under the carpet. It's all right. It'll go away. I think we can have it all, man. We can have our cake and eat it too. And I think I'll just leave it there. Thanks for listening.